Hi, I'm Violet. I've been pushed around, controlled, and made to feel like I don't matter. But when my mother-in-law told me, my son won't move for your job, hand over your savings and leave. It was the final straw. For years, I've watched my life slip through my fingers, my own dreams crushed for someone else's gain. But what happened next? Did I walk away? Or was I pulled back in? You won't believe what I had to face. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning. Hook 2. You think your family is supposed to be there for you, right? Well, mine wasn't. My mother-in-law demanded I give up everything, my job, my savings, my future, to keep her son under her control. She said leave, but something in me finally snapped. I'm not backing down anymore, but the question is, can I really escape? Or will the ties that bind me be too strong to break? What happens next will change everything. Violet sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter in her hands. It was from a prestigious firm in another city, offering her the job she had always dreamed of. It was a significant offer, one that promised both a substantial pay raise and the kind of professional growth she had worked for years to attain. Her heart raced as she thought about the life-changing opportunity. The idea of moving to a new city, starting fresh, and pushing her career forward filled her with both excitement and unease. But this wasn't just about a job, this was about her future. At 32, Violet had built a life she was proud of in their small town. She had a stable career as a marketing manager, and her husband, Calvin, was thriving as an architect. Their marriage had its ups and downs, but it was solid, or so she thought. Their comfortable life in the Midwest had provided them with security. But this job offer, was different. It was her chance to break out of the predictable routine and move towards something bigger. Yet, as she looked at the letter, doubt crept in. Calvin was supportive, or so it seemed. They had discussed the prospect of a new adventure, a fresh start, but the catch was that the job required them to relocate, a huge change, one that Violet was unsure if Calvin would fully embrace. He had built his career in the town, and uprooting their life would mean starting over in a new place. Violet had been trying to convince herself that this was the right move. She could already see herself in a new city, thriving professionally, while Calvin adjusted to the idea. She had worked so hard for this moment, and it seemed unfair to let the opinions of others stand in her way. But one thing kept nagging at her, the looming shadow of her mother-in-law, Ruth. Ruth had always had a subtle, yet undeniable influence on their family. From the way she spoke to Calvin, to the way she maneuvered through family decisions, it was as if Violet's opinion didn't matter much. Ruth was the one who made the calls, whether they were financial decisions, family gatherings, or even vacations. And Violet, for the most part, had gone along with it. After all, Ruth was Calvin's mother, and Violet had been raised to respect her elders. But the more Violet thought about it, the more she realized how much of their lives had been shaped by Ruth's expectations. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Calvin walked in, his briefcase in hand. He looked tired, but as always, he flashed a warm smile at her. "What's on your mind?" he asked, setting his things down. Violet hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to broach the subject. She had been carrying the weight of this decision alone for days, but now it was time to talk to Calvin about it. "I got an offer," she said quietly, holding up the letter. "From a firm in Chicago." Calvin raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "Chicago? That's a big move. What's the job?" Violet exhaled, her eyes drifting back to the letter. "It's a marketing manager position. It comes with a great salary increase and the chance to work with some of the top names in the industry. It's everything I've worked for." He walked over, sitting beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "That sounds amazing, Violet. Why are you looking so conflicted?" I have to relocate," she said, her voice faltering. "We'd have to move to Chicago, and I'm not sure how you'd feel about that." Calvin was quiet for a moment, processing her words. Violet couldn't read his expression, but she saw him take a deep breath. "We've talked about this, right? About the possibility of moving for a new opportunity. It sounds like a great chance for you." Violet looked at him, her heart beating faster. This was the moment she had been waiting for, Calvin's approval. And she had always wanted his support, especially from someone who, like her, had worked so hard to get where he was. But, Calvin paused, looking down at his hands, his brow furrowed. There's just one thing. We'd be leaving everything behind. My job, our home, our friends. I know, but think about it. It could be the best move for us, she interjected, her voice hopeful. It's my career. I can't pass up this kind of chance. I get that, Violet. But we can't ignore the fact that it's a big change. I don't know if I'm ready to leave all of this behind, he said, gesturing to their house, their life together. Violet's heart sank. She had hoped for more enthusiasm from him, but the hesitation in his voice made her wonder. She had always known that Calvin valued security, the stability they had built together, but now, the fear in his voice made her feel like she was being selfish for even considering the move. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. I'll get it, Calvin said, standing up. Violet watched him walk to the door, her mind racing. She had hoped for more. For a moment, she had imagined Calvin by her side, excited for the new adventure. But now, the reality of the situation felt overwhelming. Would she have to choose between her career and her marriage? Could she have both? She couldn't ignore the words that had started to echo in her mind. The words that had come from Ruth, Calvin's mother. She had always been the unseen force in their marriage, subtly guiding Calvin's decisions. Violet had tried to keep the peace, tried to stay in the background, but now she couldn't help but wonder what Ruth would think of this opportunity. Would she encourage Calvin to go? Or would she, as always, have something to say that would change everything? Violet's thoughts were interrupted as Calvin returned to the room, his face serious. The moment had arrived, the moment she had dreaded. I need to talk to my mom about this, Calvin said softly. I think we need to make sure she's okay with it. Violet blinked, her heart sinking further. Ruth. Of course, Calvin would always put his mother's opinion before hers. In that moment, Violet realized just how much Ruth had always controlled their lives. I couldn't sleep that night. The weight of the decision I had made felt heavier with every passing hour. The job offer was still sitting on the kitchen counter, untouched, like a promise I wasn't sure I was ready to keep. I had gone ahead and accepted it, but I hadn't told anyone, not Calvin, not Ruth, and certainly not my mother. I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow I was betraying everyone, especially Calvin. But at the same time, a strange sense of exhilaration coursed through me. I was doing something for myself, something I had dreamed of for so long. But the guilt, God, the guilt, was impossible to ignore. The voice of Ruth, constantly echoing in the back of my mind, wasn't making it any easier. I had let her words linger too long, hadn't I? Now, they were etched into my thoughts like a scar that wouldn't fade. The silence between us felt like a living thing. Ruth's silence, her disapproval, was suffocating. I had kept quiet for so long, too scared to upset the balance, too afraid of what it might cost. But now, for the first time in my life, I realized something. I had been living for everyone else. What about me? What about my future? My career? Wasn't I entitled to want something of my own? My whole life had been shaped by the quiet manipulation of those around me, especially Ruth. She had always controlled the dynamics of this family, subtly steering decisions, pushing Calvin in one direction or another. And now, here I was, at a crossroads. I had made a choice, but the consequences, oh, the consequences, were already beginning to ripple through the silence that had filled our lives. It didn't take long for Ruth to call. As I expected, her tone was cold, almost accusatory. Violet, she said, her voice heavy with concern, I just don't understand why you'd want to leave. Your place is here with Calvin, not chasing some job far away. I felt the old familiar pressure, the weight of her expectations pushing me back into the place I had always occupied, small, quiet, obedient. I'm not abandoning anyone, I said, my voice trembling despite myself. This is my opportunity, my career. You can't expect me to give it up because of your family, Violet, she interrupted, cutting me off. Calvin needs you here. You belong with him, not in some city where we don't even know anyone. What's going to happen to him? To us? Her words felt like a slap in the face, but worse, it was the guilt that settled in. the guilt that made me question my own desires. She had always known just what to say to make me feel like I was letting everyone down, as if her needs, Calvin's needs, the family's needs, were more important than mine. The conversation ended with Ruth's pointed silence. I hung up the phone, my heart racing, my hands trembling. It wasn't just that I felt torn anymore. It was that I was beginning to question my own right to want something for myself. Was I being selfish? Was I truly abandoning Calvin? Would this move tear us apart? But I knew deep down that it wasn't just Ruth's opinion that I was fighting. It was my own. I had spent so many years trying to meet the expectations of everyone else. My parents, Calvin's family, the people around me. I had never once stopped to consider what I really wanted, what I deserved. The phone rang again. This time, it was Calvin. "Hey," he said, his voice soft. "We need to talk." I felt a knot form in my stomach. He had been distant ever since the conversation about the job offer. We had talked about it briefly, but there had been something unspoken between us ever since. Something heavy. "Yeah," I said, trying to steady my breath. "I think we do." "I talked to my mom," he said, his voice tight. "She's really upset, Violet. She thinks you're making a huge mistake. She says you're abandoning everything for a job." I closed my eyes, the words sinking into me like a heavy weight. Ruth had already spoken to him, twisted the story, made it sound like I was the villain in all of this. I could feel the manipulation in his voice, his uncertainty, but I wasn't ready to back down. "Calvin, I'm not abandoning anyone," I said, my voice breaking. "This is about me. For once, it's about me and what I want. I can't keep living for everyone else. I can't keep letting Ruth control everything we do." There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I wondered if I had said the wrong thing. But then Calvin spoke, his tone softer. "I understand," he said quietly. "But it's not just about you, Violet. It's about us. And I'm not sure I'm ready to make that kind of change." His words stung, but I knew that was the truth. He wasn't ready. He wasn't ready to fight for me. He wasn't ready to face Ruth's wrath and stand beside me. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to do it alone. I hung up the phone, my heart sinking. The decision was becoming clearer, but the path ahead was nothing but uncertainty. I was about to make a choice that could change everything, my career, my marriage, my life, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for the fallout. I woke up the next morning feeling a quiet resolve settle within me. I had made my decision the night before, and now it was time to face the consequences. The job offer, which had felt like a lifeline, was now a heavy burden I had to carry. I knew it wouldn't be easy to break the news, but it was a step I had to take. For once, I was choosing myself. The silence that had followed Ruth's manipulation the day before still hung in the air, suffocating. I could still hear her words in my head. "Your place is here with Calvin, not chasing some job far away." The guilt gnawed at me, but there was something deeper now, something I hadn't felt before, a growing sense of anger. It was like a spark that, for the first time, had finally ignited inside me. I was done being the person everyone else wanted me to be. It was time to be the person I wanted to be. The decision had been made, but the reality of it hit me hard. How was I supposed to face Calvin? How would I explain to him that despite everything, I had chosen my career over family? My heart ached just thinking about it. But then, something clicked. This wasn't just about a job. This was about my own autonomy, my own self-worth. I had spent so many years living in the shadows of others' expectations, and I couldn't do it anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands clenched together in my lap. The weight of everything was overwhelming. I could feel the familiar pressure of Ruth's control creeping up on me again. But no, this time I wouldn't let her win. I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to give up on myself. When Calvin finally came into the room, I knew the conversation was inevitable. I had rehearsed this 1,000 times in my head, but the words still felt foreign. He looked at me with that familiar softness in his eyes, but there was a flicker of hesitation there too. He wasn't sure what to expect. He wasn't sure what to say. "Violet," he started, his voice quieter than usual. "We need to talk." I nodded, bracing myself for what was coming. I could already feel the tension between us, thickening the air like smoke. He sat down beside me, his hand finding mine, but his grip felt unsure, like he was already anticipating a fight. "Calvin, I've made up my mind," I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm going to take the job offer. I can't stay here just because it's what everyone wants me to do. I need to live, for me." His eyes widened, his jaw tightening. I could tell he wasn't expecting that. He had always been supportive, but I could see the gears turning in his mind, trying to process everything. His loyalty to his family was deep, and I knew that this decision would hurt him. But for once, I didn't care. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "What about your family? What about Ruth?" "You know she's not going to be happy with this. I'm tired of always putting everyone else's needs before mine," I said, my voice breaking a little. "I can't live in the shadow of Ruth's expectations any longer. I need to live my life, Calvin. I need to do this for me." His silence hung in the air between us like a brick wall. I could feel his hesitation, his confusion. His loyalty to his mother was evident in the way he spoke, the way he looked at me. He wasn't sure where his loyalties should lie. "I understand what you're saying," he finally said, his voice soft. "But this isn't just about you. It's about us. What happens to us, Violet? What happens when you're not here?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. "You have to make a choice too, Calvin. This is about us, but it's about me too. I've spent my entire life living for other people. I can't do it anymore. I won't." As the words left my lips, I could see the conflict on his face. He wasn't ready to confront Ruth. He wasn't ready to stand up for me, and that hurt, deeply. But just as I thought the conversation was over, something unexpected happened. Calvin's voice, small and uncertain, spoke again. I don't know if I can support you on this," he said quietly. "I don't know if I can be the one to go against my mother. I don't know if I'm ready to make that choice." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I wasn't just battling Ruth's manipulation. I was now fighting Calvin's indecision, his loyalty to his family over his loyalty to me. It was a revelation that left me feeling more alone than ever. "You have to decide, Calvin," I said, my voice steady despite the hurt. "I can't wait around for you to figure it out. I'm moving forward, with or without you." I stood up then, my legs shaky but firm. This was it. There was no going back now. I couldn't keep living like this, torn between the people I loved and my own dreams. It wasn't fair to me anymore. As I walked out of the room, I could feel the weight of the decision settle deeper into my chest. I wasn't just making a career change, I was making a life change, and it was going to cost me. The phone rang again, breaking the silence. I hesitated, then answered. It was Ruth. "Violet," she said, her voice sharp. "I've spoken to Calvin, and I need you to understand something. You're making a huge mistake. You can't just leave us like this." I felt the familiar coldness in her words, the guilt trip that was all too familiar. But this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. I had made my choice. "I'll make my own decisions from now on, Ruth," I said, my voice steady. "You'll have to accept that." As I hung up the phone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't over yet, but I was finally taking control. This was my life, and for the first time in a long time, I was living it for myself. The air in the house felt thick, as though it had absorbed every tense word, every suppressed emotion from the last few days. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the stack of papers from the company. The job offer was there, waiting for me to make my move, yet every time I reached for the phone to call them back, I hesitated. I was no longer worried about the offer itself, but about the people I'd have to leave behind to accept it. For the first time in my life, I felt a clear divide between what I wanted and what everyone else expected of me. Ruth's voice echoed in my mind, reminding me of my place in the family, reminding me that I was supposed to be loyal. Loyal to Calvin, loyal to them, loyal to this life I'd built for years. But that loyalty had come at the cost of my happiness, my ambitions, my very sense of self. I had spent my whole life trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. It was time for that to end. Still, I couldn't ignore the heavy weight of guilt sitting in my chest. What was family if not a shared history, a shared commitment to each other's well-being? I had been part of this family for so long, I wasn't sure where they ended, and I began. My loyalty to them had always felt like a burden I couldn't shake off, but now it felt like a shackle. If I didn't break free from it now, I might never get another chance. I glanced over at the clock. It was nearing lunchtime, and Calvin should have been home by now. My stomach churned as I thought about the conversation we were about to have. I knew what was coming. We were going to fight. But this time, it would be different. I had to fight for myself. When Calvin walked in, he didn't look at me right away. He just dropped his keys into the bowl by the door and kicked off his shoes, his usual routine. I wondered if he even knew what was coming. If he did, he certainly wasn't showing it. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Can we talk?" He turned, and I saw it in his eyes before he even said anything. He knew. The tension in his posture told me everything. "I know what you're going to say," he replied quietly. "I've made my decision," I said, not letting the uncertainty show on my face. "I'm going to take the job offer. I can't keep living like this, constantly trying to make everyone happy at the expense of my own life." There was a long silence. I could feel his eyes on me, but I refused to look away. I had made my choice, and now it was his turn to make his. "You're really going to do this?" Calvin's voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw the fear in his eyes. "You're going to leave all of this behind for a job? For something that might not even work out?" "I'm doing this for me," I said, the words coming out stronger than I'd anticipated. "I've spent my entire life living for other people. It's time I lived for myself." Calvin shook his head, his voice tinged with frustration. "You can't just throw everything away, Violet. My family, my mother, what do you think this is going to do to us?" I felt a sting in my chest. The words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. "And what about me, Calvin?" I said, my voice trembling now. "What about my future? What about what I want?" His silence was deafening. He didn't know how to respond. He didn't know how to face Ruth, didn't know how to break free from the tight grip she had on him, on us. "I don't know if I can do this," he said finally. "I don't know if I can let you go." I was shaking now, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "You don't have to let me go, Calvin. But I can't stay here, stuck, just because it's what's easiest for everyone else. I can't keep sacrificing my dreams for a family that doesn't even support me." I could see the hurt in his eyes, but there was also something else, something darker. A flicker of anger, of frustration, that he didn't know how to handle. "You think I want to disappoint you?" he asked, his voice quieter now, but still tense. "You think I want you to walk away from everything we've built?" "No, but you're not willing to stand up to your mother either," I shot back, my words now coming faster, more forceful. "You're scared of what she'll do if I leave. Well, I'm scared of what'll happen if I stay." The words hung in the air between us like a heavy fog. I didn't know if Calvin would ever understand, but in that moment, I realized I didn't need him to. Not for this. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was Ruth. My stomach churned. I almost didn't answer, but I had to. I needed to hear what she had to say. "What's going on, Violet?" Ruth's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. "I spoke with Calvin, and he's not happy. You've got him all twisted up with your decisions." I clenched my jaw. "Ruth, I've made my choice. I'm taking the job." "I'm not asking for your approval anymore. You think you can just walk away like that?" Ruth spat, her words cold and biting. "You're ruining everything. You're tearing our family apart." My breath hitched in my chest. "I'm not doing this for you, Ruth. I'm doing it for me." "Then I guess you'll lose Calvin too," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "If you choose your career over us, I won't let you take him from me. You'll never see him again." Her words rang in my ears as I hung up the phone. My heart raced. I had known Ruth was manipulative, But this was something else. She wasn't just trying to control my career, she was trying to control my life. And now, she had set me on a path I couldn't turn back from. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the phone in my hand, my mind a whirlwind. The pressure from both Calvin and Ruth was unbearable, but I was no longer going to let it dictate my life. I had made my choice, and now I had to live with it. But what if Calvin couldn't live with it? As I stood there, staring at Calvin, I realized that I wasn't just fighting for a career anymore. I was fighting for my future, my freedom, and my identity. The decision had been made. I could almost hear the finality in the click of the phone as I accepted the job offer. For the first time in years, I was making a decision that was entirely for me. The weight of it settled on my chest, mixing relief with a gnawing anxiety that refused to leave. I had chosen my path, but that didn't mean it would be an easy journey. The guilt, though, was heavier than I expected. Ruth's voice still rang in my ears, her words twisting in my mind like barbed wire. She wasn't just upset with my decision, she was furious. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about me daring to choose myself over them. It was a betrayal as far as she was concerned. But as much as I wanted to fall back into the comfort of the familiar, I couldn't. I had already made the call. I was leaving. There was no turning back now. I sat in the living room, hands trembling slightly as I sifted through the details of my new role. The company had been eager for my response, and the offer was more than generous. It felt like a dream in some ways, like everything I had worked for finally coming together. But there was a cost, a heavy one. This job meant leaving behind everything. My family, the life I had built here, and Calvin. It wasn't like I didn't know what was coming. The moment I had decided to take this job, I knew Calvin would react. He had always been close to his family, and Ruth's influence over him was undeniable. I had lived with it for so long, sacrificing my own wants and needs to avoid conflict, to keep the peace. But now, as I prepared to make the final leap, I was aware that this wasn't just a career decision, it was a life-altering one. The door opened, and Calvin stepped into the room. His eyes locked on mine, and I could already see the storm building in them. He had that look again, the one that told me a confrontation was coming. I didn't know how this would play out, but I wasn't going to back down. "I've made my decision," I said, before he could say anything. "I'm taking the job." Calvin's face fell, and he took a slow breath, as though trying to process what I'd just said. "Violet," he started, his voice strained. "You can't be serious. This isn't just about a job. It's about leaving everything behind. Your family. Me. This life." "I'm not leaving you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I can't stay here just because you and your mother want me to. I have my own life to live now." He shook his head, pacing the floor. "You don't understand. If you go, if you really leave, I don't know what that means for us. For me." I stared at him, feeling the cold gap between us widen. The fear in his voice, the hesitance in his every word, it all pointed back to Ruth. Calvin had never stood up to her for me. He always tried to keep the peace, tried to balance between his wife and his mother, but it was clear now that the scales had always tipped in Ruth's favor. And now it wasn't just about a job offer. It was about me finally seeing the truth, that Calvin wasn't willing to stand up for me, for us. "Why don't you ever choose me, Calvin?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "You're always choosing her, always trying to keep her happy, no matter what it costs. What about us? What about me?" He looked at me, his face crumpling with guilt, and I saw the internal battle waging within him. "You know I love you, but I can't just—" "Can't just what?" I interrupted. "Can't just stand up to her? Can't put me first for once?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stood there, lost for words, and I realized then that this was the moment where we would either move forward together or we'd fall apart. And I wasn't willing to wait for him to figure it out. "I can't keep living for everyone else," I said firmly. "I've done that for so long, but I can't do it anymore, Calvin. If you can't support me in this, if you can't stand with me, then maybe it's time to face the fact that we're not on the same path." The room felt colder, the silence thicker. And just as I was about to speak again, my phone rang. It was Ruth. I looked at Calvin, unsure of how to proceed, but the words that had been weighing on me for so long spilled out before I could stop them. "I'm leaving," I said, finally finding my voice. "And nothing is going to change that." Calvin's eyes flickered with something close to despair. "If you go, Violet, don't come back. Don't think you can just walk away and come back whenever you want." The finality in his words hit me harder than I expected. The depth of his attachment to his mother, his unwillingness to fight for us, was clearer than ever. I had already known this would come to a head, but hearing him say it, hearing that he was willing to give up on me so easily, it was a shock. Ruth's voice crackled through the phone, sharp and biting. "Violet, don't make this mistake. You'll regret it. If you walk away, you'll be tearing this family apart. You'll never be part of it again." The words stung, but they didn't hurt as much as I thought they would. I had heard them too many times, and this time, they no longer had the power to control me. "I'm not sacrificing my future for your fears," I said, my voice steady. "I'm choosing me." Ruth's response was a cold silence, a silence that said more than any words could. She wasn't going to change my mind. I hung up the phone, my heart racing, but there was a strange calm in my chest. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. The family ties that had once bound me were snapping, and the weight lifting off my shoulders felt almost too good to be true. But the cost? It would be high. I turned to Calvin, who was still standing there, his face a mixture of sadness and something I couldn't name. This wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about my future, my independence. Standing there, at the edge of everything I'd ever known, I realized that my next step would define who I was for the rest of my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone hold me back anymore. I had never been so sure of anything in my life. I packed the last of my things, rolling up the clothes that would carry me into this next chapter. Each shirt, each book, each little piece of my past life felt like it was slowly slipping through my fingers. This wasn't just a move to a new city. It was a full-on break from the life I had known, from the people who had shaped me, and from the expectations that had haunted me for years. As I folded the last shirt, I glanced around my apartment. The space that had once felt like home now seemed foreign. Each corner, each piece of furniture, held memories that I could no longer afford to cling to. I wasn't running away. I was reclaiming something I'd lost somewhere along the way. The apartment felt quieter now, almost like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to leave. The weight of the past was palpable, but it didn't feel like a burden anymore. It was just a memory. I had spent years, decades even, trying to fit myself into the boxes that others had created for me. First, Calvin, then Ruth, then the whole family. But now, I had made a decision that was all mine. This wasn't about what anyone else wanted. This was for me. I stepped out onto the balcony, looking over the city I had called home for so long. I couldn't help but feel a rush of fear and excitement mixed together. What would life be like once I left everything behind? Would I find the peace I was searching for? Or would I be lost without the familiar faces, the predictable routine? The sound of my phone ringing broke my thoughts. I looked down at the screen, and there it was. Calvin. I knew what this call would be, but I answered it anyway. "Violet." His voice was strained. "Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure," I said, my voice steady, but my heart hammering in my chest. "I've made up my mind." "I can't just let you go," he said, and I could hear the desperation in his voice. "You're all I've got. We've built this life together. Don't throw it away." "I'm not throwing anything away, Calvin," I replied. "I'm finally doing something for me. I can't keep living like this, always putting everyone else first." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, almost defeated. "I can't stop you, can I?" "No," I whispered. "But you could have tried." The conversation ended, and I felt the weight of it in my chest. Calvin's words hung in the air long after I had hung up the phone. For the first time in our relationship, I realized that I had been the one sacrificing the most. Calvin wasn't willing to fight for us, not really. I had been fighting a battle I couldn't win, with no real support from him. I let out a breath, a mix of sadness and relief, before I turned back inside. It was time to go. The drive to my new city was a blur of highway signs, passing landscapes, and the distant hum of the engine. I felt a strange sense of freedom washing over me, though the knot in my stomach wouldn't quite loosen. Leaving wasn't easy, and it wasn't going to be simple, but it was necessary. As I neared the city, the streets were unfamiliar, but they felt right. The city felt alive in a way my old town never had. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't weighed down by anyone's expectations but my own. I was in control, and that felt like power. But as the streets of my new city unfolded before me, I couldn't shake the feeling that leaving wasn't just about finding freedom. It was also about stepping into the unknown. What would life be like here? Would I find the peace I had been searching for? I pulled into the parking lot of my new apartment building. The building looked exactly like what I needed: simple, modern, and just enough space for me to start over. The elevator ride up felt like a slow countdown, and I took a deep breath before the doors opened. As I stepped out, I walked down the hallway and opened the door to my new life. The place was bare, but that was exactly what I wanted. A blank canvas. I set my bags down and let the silence fill the room. And then the phone rang again. I didn't have to look at the screen to know who it was. Ruth. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat down, staring at the phone, and for the first time, I felt the strength in my decision. Later that evening, I found myself sitting by the window, looking out over the city. The lights twinkled below me like a million possibilities, and I smiled. This was the beginning of something new. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text. Violet, you'll regret this. You're breaking my heart. You're breaking everything we've worked for. I stared at the words for a moment, feeling the familiar guilt rise in my chest. But this time, it didn't have the same weight. It was just Ruth's voice, still trying to control me. I typed a quick reply, my fingers moving with a confidence I hadn't known I had. I'm not breaking anything. I'm finally living for myself. Goodbye, Ruth. I hit send and put the phone down. For the first time in years, I was free. As I drove away, the road ahead was open, yet uncertain. But for the first time, I realized that this road could either lead to a new beginning or to a dead end. But whatever happened, it was my decision now, and I was ready to face it. The first morning in my new town was unnervingly quiet. I woke up in the small apartment I had rented, the walls still bare, the air still thick with the weight of everything I had just left behind. It was a strange feeling, this combination of relief and unease. I stood at the door for a moment, looking out at the unfamiliar street, knowing that this was it. There was no going back. I had left behind the chaos of Calvin's family, the suffocating presence of Ruth, and the life I had lived under their thumb. But now, standing in this new place, the loneliness was creeping in. I was grateful for the freedom I had fought so hard for, but it was hard to ignore the guilt that gnawed at me. I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a huge mistake. Would I ever find the peace I was craving? Or had I only traded one set of chains for another? I walked around the apartment, taking in the things I had brought with me. Some clothes, a few books, a couple of pictures. Each item felt like a small piece of my past, and for a moment I considered what I was leaving behind. Memories with Calvin, moments of love and warmth, mixed with the suffocating control that had shaped my every move for years. I knew I couldn't continue living that way, but the echoes of the past were loud in my head, and I wondered if I would ever truly escape them. Just as I started unpacking, my phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up and saw Calvin's name on the screen. A sense of dread filled me as I read the message. I need to talk. Please, come back. For a moment, I just stared at the message. My heart twisted, but I knew this was it. I couldn't go back. Not to him, not to that life. But the part of me that still cared, the part that had always cared, wanted to believe that things could be different. I tossed the phone back onto the counter and exhaled. I wasn't ready for this yet. I couldn't let him pull me back into the web of guilt and emotional manipulation. The rest of the day was a blur. I wandered the town, exploring the streets and trying to get a feel for my new surroundings. It was small, quaint, but there was something peaceful about it. I found a local coffee shop, and the owner greeted me with a warm smile and a casual chat about the weather. I smiled back, appreciating the normalcy of it all. It was a small, simple moment, but it felt like a glimpse into the life I could have here, one where I could be myself without the weight of other people's expectations. But even as I savored the cup of coffee in my hand, my mind kept drifting back to Calvin and Ruth. I had spent so many years trying to keep them happy, trying to fit into their mold. And now, here I was, standing on my own for the first time in forever. Was this really freedom? Or was I just running from the only people who had ever truly known me? As I walked back toward my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled in two directions. I had made a bold choice, but part of me still wanted to turn around, go back, and fix everything. But I knew I couldn't. Not if I wanted to build a life that was truly mine. That's when I saw her. Violet? I turned to see Sarah, an old friend of mine from my time with Calvin. She had always been part of that world, part of the group that had been so tightly wound around me. "I can't believe it's you," she said, her eyes widening. "What are you doing here?" I'm just getting settled," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She studied me for a moment, a mix of concern and curiosity in her expression. "I didn't know you were moving. Calvin's been, well, he's been pretty upset. He's been asking about you, you know." The mention of Calvin made my chest tighten. I hadn't seen him in weeks, and I hadn't expected to run into someone who still carried his shadow. "I had to go," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't working anymore." She nodded slowly, as if processing what I was saying. "I get it. It's just, I don't know, Violet. Things were so good with you two. I never thought it would end like this." I felt a pang in my chest, but I swallowed it down. Sometimes things aren't meant to last. "Yeah," she agreed, but her voice softened. "But you know, he really does love you." I felt my heart drop. "He doesn't love me enough to stand up to his mom," I said, before I could stop myself. "I'm not going to keep sacrificing myself for him anymore." Sarah seemed taken aback by the edge in my voice. She didn't say anything for a moment, then simply nodded. "I get it. Just take care of yourself, okay?" As she walked away, I stood there, feeling the weight of her words. There was a part of me that wanted to go back, to fix things, to pretend like nothing had changed, but I knew deep down that the real fix had to come from me. I couldn't keep running back to the past. I had to move forward, no matter how much it hurt. That evening, I drove past my old house, the familiar street, the front porch where Calvin and I had spent so many nights sitting together. I parked across the street, the silence inside the car swallowing me whole. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. And then I saw it. Him, with her. A woman standing next to him on the porch, smiling, laughing. Everything I had ever wanted from him, now given to someone else. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the image that felt like a gut punch. I had never imagined him moving on so quickly, but now I knew. I was just a chapter in his life. And he had turned the page. It hit me like a wave, betrayal, sadness, anger. But beneath it all was something else. And a realization, a deep cathartic understanding that I had to let go. I had to stop holding on to a future with someone who had already moved on. I put the car in drive and pulled away, the road ahead feeling uncertain. But as I drove further away from everything that had once been my life, I felt the weight of it all starting to lift. The next few days passed in a blur of reflection and quiet determination. I had spent so many years trying to please others, trying to fit into roles that weren't mine. But now, I was starting to feel the shift. I was beginning to reconnect with the person I used to be, the person I had lost somewhere along the way. I found a support group in town, somewhere I could talk and listen to others who had faced their own battles. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I was learning how to be alone without being lonely, how to be strong without feeling the need to prove myself to anyone. And then, just when I thought things were finally starting to make sense, I got the call. It was Ruth. "Violet," she said, her voice cold. "You've made a terrible mistake. You're going to regret this. I'm taking legal action. You can't just walk away from everything we've built." I sat in silence for a moment, the phone pressed against my ear. This was it. The truth I had been running from was finally catching up to me. Ruth wasn't about to let me go without a fight. "Don't come crawling back," she added before hanging up. I put the phone down slowly, the weight of it all sinking in. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. The air felt different as I walked toward the room where I knew Calvin and Ruth would be waiting. I had been avoiding this moment for weeks, but I knew it was inevitable. It was time to face the past, confront the people who had shaped my life in ways I no longer wanted to be shaped. I stood at the door for a moment, taking a deep breath, and I felt the weight of the years press down on me. The guilt, the anger, and the fear all collided inside me. Part of me wanted to run, but I had come too far to turn back now. This was it, the moment that would either free me or trap me forever. As I dressed, I reminded myself that I didn't need their approval anymore. I had earned my independence, and now it was time to stand firm. I wasn't the same person who had walked into their world years ago. I was stronger now. I had broken free, and there was no going back. I stepped into the room. Ruth and Calvin were already there. The tension between us hung in the air like thick smoke, and for a moment, none of us spoke. I could feel the history between us, the old power dynamic still in place, and it made my skin crawl. But I wasn't going to be the silent one anymore. Ruth's eyes narrowed, and her lips curled into a tight smile. "I see you finally decided to come back," she said coldly, her voice dripping with disdain. I didn't respond immediately. I needed to steady myself. But before I could, Ruth added, "I can't believe you would throw away everything for some job. You're making a mistake, Violet." The words hit me like a slap in the face, but they didn't have the same sting they used to. She could say whatever she wanted, but I knew the truth now. This wasn't about the job. This was about control. I met her gaze, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't intimidated. "I'm not here to beg for your approval anymore, Ruth. I'm done living my life the way you want me to." The air in the room seemed to shift, but before anything else could be said, Calvin spoke up. "Violet, please. You don't have to do this. I don't want to lose you." His voice, full of emotion, seemed to echo in the silence. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something that I had been unwilling to face before. Calvin wasn't the partner I thought he was. He had never stood up for me. He had always let Ruth call the shots, letting me carry the weight of the world on my shoulders while he stood by, silent. "You've never fought for me, Calvin," I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I expected. "You've always let her make the decisions for both of us. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep sacrificing myself for you, for her, for this family." For a moment, there was silence. Calvin's face twisted in confusion and hurt, but I didn't care. I had carried that burden long enough, and it was time to put it down. "Calvin," I continued, my voice shaking with emotion, "I can't keep waiting for you to decide to fight for me. I need to fight for myself." He looked at me, mouth slightly open, but no words came out. I could see the guilt and confusion in his eyes. The man I had once loved, the man I thought would stand by me, was standing there, unable to even defend me. In that moment, I realized just how far gone we were. And then Ruth spoke again, her tone more venomous than ever. "You think you've won? You think you're free? You're nothing without us. You'll regret this, Violet. You always do." But I wasn't listening to her anymore. I was listening to the woman I had become, the woman who had found her strength, who had fought for her own happiness. I took a deep breath, standing taller than I ever had before. "No, Ruth. I'm not going to regret it. I've spent my whole life trying to please everyone else, and look where it got me. I'm not going back to that. I'm not going back to you." There was no turning back now. I had said the words out loud, and it felt like the weight of the world had lifted off my shoulders. The room was quiet as I stood there, feeling the rush of emotions flood over me. Ruth and Calvin were both silent, but I could see the shock in their eyes. This wasn't how they had expected things to go. They had expected me to break, to give in, to come crawling back, but I wasn't going to do that anymore. Ruth's face turned red, and for a moment I thought she might lash out. "You've made a huge mistake," she said, her voice tight with anger. "You'll regret this. You'll never be part of this family again." I shook my head. "That's not for you to decide anymore." I turned to Calvin, who was still staring at me, the pain in his eyes unmistakable, but I couldn't stay for him anymore. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of his indecision. I walked toward the door, ready to leave. I had made my choice. I was walking away from the past, from everything I had known. I had no idea what the future would bring, but it was mine to decide. Just as I reached the door, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at it, and a strange feeling washed over me. It was a message from my old friend, Sarah. The message read, "I have an opportunity for you. It could change everything. Call me when you're ready." I stood there for a moment, the door in front of me, my heart racing. The past was behind me. But what lay ahead? I didn't know, but I knew I was ready to face it. As I stepped out of the house, the world felt different. The air, the streets, everything seemed to shift. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally free. I didn't make it far before my phone rang again. This time, it was Ruth. I took a deep breath before answering. "You've made a terrible mistake, Violet," she said, her voice colder than ever. "You're ruining everything. I'll make sure you regret this." I listened, but I wasn't afraid anymore. The words didn't have the power they once did. The only thing I had to worry about now was my future, and I was ready to face it, whatever it held. The call ended abruptly, but the threat still lingered. But I wasn't running from it anymore. With my past finally behind me, I was about to step into a future that would demand everything I had left, and more. The sun was barely rising, but the warmth of the morning light filtered through the window, reminding me of how far I had come. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking out at the view of the city, feeling like I had just stepped into a new life. It was hard to believe, but the last few months had changed everything. From the lows I had once thought would swallow me whole, I had risen. What felt like a journey through fire had, at last, turned into something else, something lighter. The fire had burned, but now the embers were warming me, not burning me. I felt a mix of relief and sadness. The family I had always longed for, one that would support me unconditionally, was never going to be mine. Ruth and Calvin, the people who should have been my rock, had never been there when I needed them most. And even now, as I stood on the other side of the fire, I couldn't help but mourn the possibility of what could have been. I had wanted their love, their approval, but I had finally realized I couldn't live for that anymore. I had to live for me. As I sat there in silence, reflecting on everything I had left behind, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the sudden interruption startled me. I opened the door to find a letter in the hands of the delivery driver. No return address. My heart skipped a beat. Opening it slowly, I found the familiar handwriting of my old mentor, someone I hadn't heard from in years. The letter was warm, thoughtful, and full of encouragement. It reminded me that even after all the hurt and betrayal, genuine connections could still be found. Despite everything, there were people who still cared. The letter was like a small light in a dark room, and I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was more waiting for me than I had thought. As I contemplated the letter, a phone call came in, jolting me from my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number. Hesitating, I answered. "Violet?" The voice on the other end sounded familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. "I have an offer for you. Something big, but I need you to know, there's unfinished business." The words sent a chill down my spine. Unfinished business? Who was this? And what did they mean by that? I didn't have time to process it further, as the line clicked dead. The mystery of it all left me wondering if the past was truly behind me. A few days later, I received another call. this time from an old colleague. He offered me an opportunity I couldn't refuse, a project that could elevate my career in ways I had only dreamed about. It was everything I had worked for, and yet, as I listened to him explain the details, a sense of unease settled over me. This job would pull me deeper into the world I had been trying to escape. "Take your time," my colleague said, sensing my hesitation. "This is a chance to really make something of yourself." I wanted to jump at the offer, to seize it with both hands, but I couldn't shake the feeling that accepting it meant leaving behind the life I had just begun to build, one that was peaceful and independent, away from Ruth and Calvin's shadows. The conflicting emotions were overwhelming. I spent hours talking to my close friends, seeking their counsel. They reminded me that I had to live for myself now, that I couldn't keep choosing between my past and my future. They were right. I had spent too much of my life trying to please others, and now was the time to decide what was best for me. But as I continued to weigh the decision, the phone rang again. The voice on the other end was familiar, but this time it wasn't a friendly voice. It was Calvin's. "Violet," he began, his voice tight. "I don't know what you're planning, but you can't walk away from this family and leave things like this. You owe us. You owe me. If you take that job, you're walking away from everything we've built. From me." His words stung, not because I didn't expect them, but because they made me realize just how little he understood me, how little he had ever fought for me. "You don't get it, Calvin," I said, my voice shaking but steady. "I'm not your burden anymore. You never fought for me. You never stood by me. This family, this life we had, was never truly mine to begin with. And I'm done." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "I don't want to lose you, Violet, but I can't change. I can't stand up to her. I never could." That was the moment I realized Calvin was just as trapped as I had been. But I wasn't going to stay trapped, not anymore. The conversation ended, and I hung up, feeling a sense of finality settle over me. I had always wondered if there was a way back. If maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild the family I had lost. But now I understood that some things could never be rebuilt. Some people couldn't change, no matter how much you wanted them to. I made my decision that afternoon. I packed my things, once again, symbolizing my break from the past. I wasn't just leaving a house. I was leaving behind the remnants of a life I had outgrown. And for the first time, I felt light, unburdened, ready to step forward. The final goodbye was harder than I anticipated. As I drove away from the home that had once been mine, I didn't feel the anger or bitterness I thought I might. There was just a calm acceptance. I had made my choice, and it wasn't just a choice to leave. It was a choice to live, to finally claim my own path. I looked ahead, the road stretching out before me, uncertain but promising. Whatever came next, it was mine to decide. I wasn't looking back anymore. Just as I was about to enter the highway, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a link to a website, a news story about my family, and about the rumors Calvin and Ruth had been spreading about my career. The story painted me as a traitor, as someone who had abandoned her family for fame and fortune. I felt a surge of anger rise in me, but it was quickly replaced by something stronger, clarity. They hadn't changed. They were still trying to control me, still trying to ruin what I had worked for, but this was just another battle, and I was ready for it. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but I had already survived the worst. This was just another challenge, and I was more than ready for it.